We're off and running on another day. We welcome you to the middle of the week. Certainly, the narrative seems to be the same for the last couple of days. It's attack Nick Saban, attack the SEC, and that has not changed. A couple of stories making the rounds. One, former Saban player Dre Kirkpatrick said Nick Saban was outcoached. And what about another one, which we'll talk about? But let's start with Dre Kirkpatrick. Dre's not sure about Bama's outlook after seeing Saban outcoached. It's one thing for a commentator like me or you or someone else to say that Nick Saban may have been outcoached, but for a Saban player, I mean, what is happening here? What's going on? I thought Alabama was number one in the country again. Oh, they are? Okay. We'll talk about that if you want me to. Apparently all the negativity is getting the better of folks. Anyway, Alabama is number one in the country. The Sports Illustrated has declared them that, just like the USA Today and just like the AP poll will in a couple of days, actually a week from next Monday. So SI says Bama is the class of college football again. Finally, a positive headline. Would have never known it. Coming up on today's show, just when you thought it was safe to get ready for the college football season, we're going to talk about golf. Charlie Rymer knows a little bit about the sport. Son plays at an SEC school. He's covering the PGA Championship, where apparently some of our staff is also attending. Matt Stinchcomb, he's in studio. Phil Steele for an hour. He was here a couple of weeks ago. Back by popular demand. Your phone calls during the 5 o'clock hour. The phone calls also right now at 855-242-7285. A little bit later, we're going to get into an anonymous poll taken by the Sporting News, talking to coaches, and Nick Saban's on that one again as one of the most overrated coaches in the country. I guess I called Lane Kiffin, huh? We will take your phone calls at 855-242-7285. Look forward to visiting with all of you here on this program. Many headlines as we've already gotten to, many more to come. Bama will go a little bit over the SI top 25, I believe, as with Randy, Florida State number 2 in that. Is that correct? So
yeah, Florida State number 2, and I believe Auburn came in at number 10, so we'll reveal the whole top 25 poll probably shortly.
And you're listening to Randy Heritage, who's filling in for pretty much everyone else. Randy,
empty space right here, Paul.
I know the PGA Championship is about 5 miles away from here, but did that mean it doesn't start till tomorrow?
Exactly. So that bears the question, where are they? Where's Coobs? Where's John on a Wednesday?
Yeah.
Maybe we'll opine about that throughout the
next
4 hours.
I don't know who their agents are, but I want him for my next deal.
It's a good gig if you can get it.
I mean, the only people that I know that get Wednesdays off are doctors. That's like a standard doctor.
Pediatricians don't even think about.
They play golf on Wednesday afternoon. It's just written in the cards. Do not get sick on a Wednesday. Anyway, Randy is here, and we appreciate it. You'll see a lot of Randy because Kubiak does have a new contract, which gives him every other day off. Let's get to the calls, I should say, at 855-242-7285. Let's start with Mark, who is in Tennessee. Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to our show.
Yes, Paul. I was just calling in to see what your take was on all these coaching jobs and the pressure that's being put on the schools. And I feel like Butch Jones is going to be on the pedestal this year if he don't have a good winning season. Just wondering what your take was. Go Vols.
Thank you. Yeah, listen, I don't know. I'm actually going to be in Knoxville before the season, so I'd rather wait till I get on the ground there, get a chance to sample public opinion even more than we do here. But I don't think Butch Jones is on anyone's hot seat at the moment. A bad season can put anyone on a hot seat. Well, maybe not the guy in Tuscaloosa, but pretty much anyone else. I think there is pressure at Tennessee to win and to keep the program moving forward. But last season, in the end, wasn't all that bad. It was just not quite as good as the expectations. But I think Butch Jones, for now, in good shape. Mark in Massachusetts. is up next.
Hey, Paul, how's it going? I think Butch Jones is somebody who is on the hot seat, and I don't know what he's going to have to do to get off the hot seat, because Tennessee's football expectations within the school are, I don't really know what those are. You know, if he's calling a season where they win a Music City Bowl a success, then I don't know if that's just coming for him or from the entire administration.
Well, you got to remember, Mark. His administration is all new. He's got a new athletic director.
That usually makes it tougher.
And a new president, chancellor. It can make it tough if things go poorly. Right now, I think Butch Jones, believe it or not, won the offseason. People can quibble about his cliches, but he was able to convince enough people, I believe, in Knoxville that he's doing a good job. Now,
at the end of the day, nobody cares if you win the offseason.
No, Mark, you're right. You actually finished my thought for me very well.
And no problem, Paul. I think, though, that the administration needs to – I assume they've done this, but if their expectations are to go – whatever the bare minimum to get into a bowl game, and then play a team that doesn't really have a quarterback in a bowl game and win it, and then that's going to be your goal every year. Then I think that that's sad for a Tennessee program, which is so historic, to go down to those expectations, where a lot of teams in my area have come down, and my area is not known for its college football, and that. I hope that Butch Jones and the Tennessee administration can find higher standards more than.
Well, first of all, Mark, I don't know. Just because some guy calls in here doesn't make that the standard at Tennessee. I don't think we really know. And you made a really salient point a minute ago. What's said in the offseason doesn't matter once the season begins. And all it takes, Mark, is a bad loss for everything to go out the window.
But he lost to Vanderbilt.
Yeah, but what Butch Jones has been able to do more effectively than almost any coach I can think of is by winning the last game every year, he's been able to wipe away the bad losses. I don't know if he can continue to do that, but I will say that when I said he won the offseason, that means he gets to game one without the Kevin Sumlin conversation. But if he loses the first game, and if he loses the Florida game, where is he?
Well, I think that they don't have a very forgiving schedule, because they have – here, I got to get that up right here. They have a schedule where you have
I'll read it to me. They have Georgia Tech,
Indiana State, Florida, UMass, Georgia, and then the bye.
And then Georgia. When you – I mean –
that's a hard schedule to start off.
I mean, you could look at the worst-case scenario, and the worst-case scenario is 2 and 3 for the month of September. If Tennessee is 2 and 3, you can forget everything I just got through saying about him not being on the hot seat. Okay.
Really?
Well, really, yeah, because you got Alabama, that's 4.
Yeah.
You got South Carolina. You got all these games that are suddenly in play. If you're 2 and 3, the game at Missouri is a dangerous game. The game at Kentucky is a dangerous game.
Oh, I didn't understand what you meant there. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I think that they have to come out of the gates, and I think this is good for them. It's better than last year's season where they started off with Appalachian State. Appalachian State is a tough team to get your team pumped up for, but now with Georgia Tech, I think Butch Jones, if he can get his players up and ready to go, I think this could be a good season for him. But I don't know, because that is a tough schedule. He has no teams that are okay teams. He has teams that are a little bit
Mark,
better.
I was just talking to Randy while you were talking. I think the one-loss record that would create the most angst is 8-4, because 8-4 is a step back from last year. It's pretty average. You can't spin 8-4 every year. So I think 8-4 is a reasonable record. I don't think fans are going to be jumping off of bridges, but on the other hand, you start to wonder, what kind of program do we have? Is Butch? So listen, we're probably spending too much time on a coach who I think is going to have a slightly better than expected season. Appreciate the call. Good to hear from you. Let's check in with Matt in San Antonio. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing good, Paul. I want to talk about Kevin Sumlin. You guys said on your show that we're probably going to go 8-4 again this year. No, not you, but the guy that was on your show, the guest.
Okay. Yeah, that was Brent Zwerneman, who covers the team.
Yeah, I disagree with that statement there.
Why is that?
Because I really don't think, if you really look at their schedule, I know the first real tough game is UCLA, and then we have three cupcakes opponents. We're really going to go 8-4 this year because of we do bring back enough players. We lose a lot of our other good players.
I hope you're not including Arkansas among the cupcakes because Arkansas is the
No,
third
I don't
game.
mean Arkansas. I mean the other two.
Okay, Matt, we do this all the time, and this is the scheduled time of the year. You look at let's take let's take 3 games off the board. I mean, I could the two of us could coach A&M to wins over Nichols, Lafayette, and New Mexico. So the Aggies start off 3-0.
Okay.
Where are the other wins going to come from? UCLA, South Carolina, Alabama?
South Carolina.
Okay, that's 4.
I see Alabama.
Mississippi State, I would say, is 5. That's at home.
That's 5. Florida, I say that's a loss there. Mississippi State, Auburn's a loss. New Mexico, Ole Miss, and LSU is a win.
Matt, are you telling me you think the Aggies are going to win in Baton Rouge?
Yes. I say that because LSU lost a lot of their players as well.
It's also the last game. It's the 12th game of the season, so what happened last year doesn't matter a whole lot.
I agree with you. Last year doesn't matter a whole lot, but I'm just basing off the fact that LSU lost a lot of their players to the draft, and I see A&M having a bounce-back season because they return a little bit more starters, but they lose a lot of theirs as well.
Okay, listen, you know what I like about the season finally being here, Matt? We quit having this conversation every day. Not personal, but it's just nobody knows. That's where we are. Tennyson is up next. He's also in Texas. Good afternoon, Tennyson.
Hey, Paul. How is your day going?
Pretty well.
First off, I just wanted to say to my family as well as on the radio, I love them, and today was actually the 1-year anniversary of my grandfather passing. He fought in Vietnam, so
wow.
I loved him to death, and I hope he's doing well in heaven.
Thank you very much, Joe. Appreciate that.
But what I wanted to talk about, actually, is first off, this thing with Butch Jones, the game last year with Nebraska. I can't remember if they won that game or not. I think they did, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
Okay, all right. So they beat Nebraska. But the thing with Nebraska is that Nebraska is the number one team of academic All-Americans, and so they're not exactly bringing in 5-star athletes. They're bringing in scholars. And the reason I bring this up is because of all of the talk with UCLA. UCLA quarterback Josh Rosen said that if Alabama raised their ACT and their SAT requirements, they wouldn't do that well. I just can't understand why that's such a big deal, and especially I don't understand why.
I'm glad you brought it up. I've spent the last 2 days talking about Josh Rosen on this program and elsewhere, and I'm still not sure what it's all about. If you eliminate the shot at Alabama, I don't think that story makes it out of the gate, do you?
I think that because he brought up Alabama, this story is being blown up. I actually asked you this question a couple of days ago with the player that got suspended from Alabama. You remember me asking you if he played for any other team, this story would have been blown up as much, and you said that if he played for Purdue, no one would really care?
Well, and listen, it's the same way if you look at pro football with the Cowboys or baseball with the Yankees. Alabama is with all due respect to Clemson having that one national championship in the last 40 years, it is everything that happens at Alabama is a big deal. Every story connected to Nick Saban is magnified. So, yeah, that's a much bigger story. I actually don't think Rosen went out of his way to take a shot at Alabama. I think Rosen was just in a free-flowing conversation, and he thought, man, I'll make a point here about Alabama. Why would I make a point about someone else that nobody cares about? We'll take a break. Your phone calls, more guests, plenty of guests to come, including Charlie Rymer. We'll talk to Matt Stinchcomb, Phil Steele. We'll take your phone calls. All of that coming up next. Better Built, makers of America's original aluminum truck toolbox, brings you a variety of truck toolboxes to fit your truck and your lifestyle. Head to lifebetterbuilt.com for more information. On the program, glad you are with us, folks on radio, rejoining us. We were talking about an anonymous a story, quoting anonymous sources, saying Saban was the most overrated coach in the country. Rick is up next in Tennessee. Hello, Rick.
How you doing, Paul?
Really well.
I just don't understand why. I mean, I'm a Tennessee fan, but people keep saying, and I keep seeing it on the internet, where they're saying Coach Saban is overrated. He's not overrated. He's a good coach. I mean, I just don't understand why they do that.
Well, I'll tell you why they do it. Because, and I've had coaches tell me, pretty prominent coaches. I'll see them, and they'll say, "How does Saban ever lose with all those players?" So that's one way of looking at it. Saban makes mistakes. He's not infallible. We found that out last year in the national championship game. But I just think he's such a big target that he is very easy to criticize. I will say one thing, though. I've never heard. Have you ever heard anybody say that Bill Belichick is overrated? I have not.
No, I've not.
But Saban is overrated because every year he has to go out and recruit a new batch of players.
No, that's true. But I just don't understand it. I can understand if you're saying the players are not doing the game or he's messing up a lot in coaching, but I've not seen it.
You realize in the last 3 years, Nick Saban has lost 2 regular season games?
Yeah, I mean, how many coaches can say they've ever done that?
Urban Meyer is probably the only one close.
Yeah,
no, it's a great point. Listen, I think we're all guilty of it. If you on a program like this, if somebody says, "Hey, Nick Saban's the best coach in the country," we're probably not going to put that on your screen because it's already known. So when you see a negative article, and we seem to have a lot of them, the article that probably maybe surprised me a little bit was the former player. But again, it's like the Josh Rosen article. Things get taken so far out of context these days that most people watching at home or listening in their car don't really know what these stories are all about. Let's continue. More phone calls. John in Bentonville, Arkansas. Hello, John. Good afternoon.
Hey, Paul. I had to come on today and give some love and put the people on notice that the best quarterback in the SEC resides in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and is named Austin Allen. I feel that this man has been so disrespected this offseason after leading the SEC in passing yards and with 25 touchdowns, despite being sacked 35 times and trying to overcome the worst defense in the history of Razorback football. Now, let me tell you, if Austin Allen and Jalen Hurts switched teams last year, I believe Alabama wins the national championship and Arkansas doesn't even make a bowl game. I think that's a fact, Paul.
Well, I would agree with you, and we talked to Austin at Media Days, and you could really sense that he has a chip on his shoulder, that he feels like he has something to prove and is going to prove it. And when Bielema was on here the other day, I think he feels it as well. So, listen, I hope it is motivation. I think Allen is a really cool guy, and I'm hopeful that he has a big last year. We will take a break here. We are continuing to take your phone calls at 855-242-7285, 855-242-7285. Phil Steele in about 90 minutes. He'll take your phone calls. He did this a couple of weeks ago. We may have just been on radio that day during the holidays. He will join us. Matt Stinchcomb in studio to give us his take. And Charlie Rymer today. I have people ask me, Charlie, how do you talk about college football all year long, and I'm sure people ask you the same question. How do you talk about golf all year long?
You know, golf has just so much depth to it. And just like football, there's a whole bunch of little games in the big game. And one of the things that's really cool growing up here in this area, you know, I played a lot of golf. But when I was a kid, you couldn't really learn a lot about golf because there wasn't a golf channel. There wasn't the internet. And you couldn't learn about the architects. You couldn't learn about how golf courses are built. You couldn't learn about the history of the game. You couldn't learn the storylines like we do now and the instruction. I mean, everybody that follows golf typically plays golf. They want to play a little bit better. So you take a kid growing up right now who's 12, 13 years old and loves golf and plays a lot of it and watches the Golf Channel and watches our programming, sure. You can really, by the time you're 18, 20 years old, understand how much depth there is to our game, how many subjects there are to talk about within golf, and it's it's a puzzle, that can't really ever be put together. Nobody masters golf, and it amazes me, really how many places there are to go in golf, just like following college football.
No doubt. You grew up in Fort Mill, which is in the shadows of, I don't mean that literally, but down the road from Rock Hill, which is a high school football power, producing a lot of talent. You went to Georgia Tech. I said that jokingly.
I know you rolled your eyes when you said you went to Georgia Tech. I know we're not SEC, but by the way, we have beat Georgia 2 of the last 3 years. Yeah. I'm just saying.
Now we're live. I was about to kill that segment. Georgia Tech was in the SEC. Mm-hmm. Proud member till they committed some unpardonable sin and have been excommunicated. You grew up a football fan. In addition to being a professional golfer, your son is a football player and is now on the campus at Missouri.
Yeah. My son Hayden, he is he was redshirt freshman last year. He's up in camp right now. Of course, he was up there in Columbia, Missouri, all summer for workouts, and he's currently 4th on the depth chart. He's working really hard. He loves the college football environment. But I'm gonna tell you what, Paul. I've always been a fan of college football. And it's easy to sort of get down on your team when they don't play very well, but seeing how hard these kids work, I mean, they really don't have an off season. I mean, they really only have a few weeks off, but seeing how hard they work, they're up, you're sleeping in, folks. They're getting up at 5 o'clock and they're heading into workouts. They got meetings late. They go at it year round. And it's changed my attitude, about the game. I just didn't know how much work went into it.
Well, it's interesting because it comes, Charlie, in the heels of this explosion yesterday by Josh Rosen, who's a quarterback at UCLA, and he talked about the challenge of balancing football and what they're supposedly there for, to get an education.
Yeah, and it really is challenging. And you mentioned Georgia Tech. I played golf at Georgia Tech. I thought I sort of worked hard at golf. I saw listen, I'm not one of the golfers that claims to be an athlete. I'm a golfer. But, I thought I worked pretty hard at it. But to see what these football players do, basketball players, I mean, really across all sports, and it really is tough. The pressure that you have to perform day in and day out, and the time demands of being an athlete, and then go sit in the classroom, and it's challenging. I'm gonna tell you what, if you're a college athlete out there anywhere and you graduate, you get a degree, you know what, you've pulled off something really, really strong, because there's only so many hours in a day.
You talk about there's no bad place to play golf in college, but in Atlanta, with the rich tradition of that city and down the road, I mean, that had to be pretty cool.
It was a lot of fun, and of course, Bobby Jones is a Georgia Tech graduate and co-founder of Augusta National, and so we got to play a lot of the really good golf courses in Atlanta. But the cool thing was, every year, some of Bobby Jones's best buddies were the original members at Augusta National, and a group of alums who were members at Augusta National would take our whole team down to play every year, and some of them were a little bit on up there in age, and there was one gentleman who's passed away now. We had to go by the nursing home to pick him up, and because the rules at Augusta, you have to have one member there for every 3 guests, and you have to have them there, and we kept thinking, we hope Mr. Reef made it through the night last night, because we got to get him on the grounds tomorrow. But it's really neat to go down there and get a chance to play and hear Bobby Jones' stories firsthand from some of his buddies. And it was some memories that I'll never forget. Now every year when I go back to cover the Masters, not only do I know the storylines of the players and the history of the golf tournament and all that, but I know firsthand stories that I heard from Bobby Jones, which I have a tremendous amount of respect for his career, how he played. But, I mean, you hear all the stories about him being a gentleman. Firsthand, I can tell you he truly was.
Wow, how interesting. Charlie Rymer with us. Charlie, it's almost become a cliche question to ask anyone in golf about Tiger Woods. You probably see him more than most of us down in Orlando or in that area, I should say. What's going on with him, and is he going to be able to come back?
You know, of course, everybody wants to know that. I spent some time with him one-on-one, actually about 6 weeks before his incident, and which he's going through right now, trying to figure out his illegal issue with the car incident. But he is someone who's dealt with chronic pain for quite some time, and what he's going through is pretty common for people who have dealt with chronic pain for a long time. And I'll just tell you this, it's my wish that he gets healthy, he gets pain-free, and he gets everything sorted out where he can have a life, a little more normal life, and be able to enjoy the accomplishments he's had, because everybody in our business owes a huge debt of gratitude to Tiger Woods for what he did for golf. So there's people want to see him come back and play, but first he's got to get healthy and get happy. And if that happens, I just hope we get a chance maybe to see him play some golf in the future. And anything that we get from this point forward, I just view as a bonus.
You are a golf commentator, so I think you would be a pretty good person to ask you. Nicklaus dabbled in commentary for a long time. Trevino, Fuzzy. So many other golfers along the way. Faldo now, of course, Johnny Miller. Do you see Tiger Woods sitting in the 18th tower one day?
I used to think, no, that's not going to happen. But I think that he wants to be involved in golf somehow, some way. It wouldn't surprise me if he gave it a shot, because he is sharp as a tack. He wouldn't have any problem pulling it off. But his interest in golf, he's doing a little bit of golf design. I'll tell you what, he's got an amazing foundation, the Tiger Woods Foundation. He's got a couple of centers across the country. He does a lot of things to help a lot of young people, and he's going to stay connected to golf in that way. But if he wants to, I think they can find a spot for him. And I love hearing him talk, because every now and then he'll come in. He basically co-hosts a few events. He'll come in, and his comments are always spot on. But the hard thing for him about that would be most of his buddies now are on the PGA Tour champions. He knows more about the older guys than he does the young guys. So I think if he came in to do it, people would certainly be interested in what he has to say.
And I don't want to be a critic, but usually with most commentators, Faldo's got a few majors. They all have some accomplishment. He would have a hard time, though, because he has so many. Because you're not going to be talking about that 74 U.S. Open, because he's got 13 other ones to talk about. Yeah,
definitely. And when you've done it, and you say this is how it feels, well, you're telling the truth. A lot of times folks will ask me a question, how does it feel coming down the stretch? And I won every level I competed at, except for the PGA Tour. I was close a couple times, but and I always try and stay away from the questions, that I hadn't actually had that experience. But you've got to, if you're going to sit in the 18th tower covering golf for one of the networks, I think you just, one of the prerequisites has to be that you've got to be a major champion.
But you've also raised a good point. Certainly, you've played the game, you know it. You're not encumbered, though, by whether you were in a playoff to win the Masters. But talk about your approach. You come in every day. It's a freewheeling show. It's fun. You do play-by-play for the majors on satellite. What is your approach when you get behind a microphone?
Well, one of the things that I'm very, very passionate about is growing this game of golf. I've been in it so long that the reason I'm passionate about it is golf's a positive influence in society, and it does so much good. You look at the money that it raises for different charities. The PGA Tour alone is over $2 billion in earnings. And when you get young people in particular hooked on golf, the doors that it opens as they go through life, life because I've seen what it's done for me and my family. It's unbelievable. So you've got the governing bodies in the PGA of America, of which I'm a member, the PGA Tour, Augusta National, USGA, NBC Sports Golf Channel. We're all into growing the game of golf, primarily because we think it's great for kids. It's great for people that play golf, older people. I mean, what brings people together for 4 hours where they can get out, get some exercise, be in a pretty place? Granted, you're probably going to be a little frustrated playing from time to time, but golf does it.
Where do you play you can get a 4-hour round?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. 4.5 hours, but it does. It brings people together, and I'm really passionate about that. And the seat that I sit in allows me to do that, especially with young people. If you're sitting there watching this, you don't know much about golf, and you got some young people, your grandparent, your parent, get a golf club in their hands. Get them out to a golf course, and if they get hooked on it, you watch and see. It's going to open some doors for them as they move through life.
Let's end talking about the Missouri Tigers and your son, because being a Georgia Tech grad, I doubt you were paying much attention to the Missouri football program until recently. So how locked in will you be this fall?
Well, I got a chance to go some of the games last year. They finished up by beating Vanderbilt and Arkansas at home. I actually scored some sideline passes for that Arkansas game. It was the best game they played all year. The defense held in the second half, and I'm down there by the governor of Missouri watching the game, and I ran out on the field with a team. I mean, it was really an unbelievable experience. But no, they've had a tough couple of years, and the school and the football program. But you know what, Coach Odom he's running an accountable program, and they're doing things right, and I love seeing that. I love seeing the work ethic, and I'm just thrilled. My son is part of an amazing program. He's a preferred walk-on there. He's trying to work his way up to scholarship. He's putting the time in, and he really enjoys the school. He loves the experience. You know, I mean, are you kidding me? You get to go to an SEC school, which isn't quite Georgia Tech, but that's okay. But he loves the experience, and you know
we'll
what?
See about that Labor Day night.
We're hoping he gets to play. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take some breaks. But either way, the time that he's putting in now, I'm just telling him, in life, long term, it's going to pay off, and I think he understands that.
Okay, final question from the college football world. And I've played with Steve Spurrier too many times, and I know he's not the answer. Who's the best college football coach that you played golf with?
You know, I've had a chance to play golf with Paul Johnson a couple times, and he's a fearless coach. You know that triple option. I mean, who goes for it more on fourth down than Paul Johnson? And he might not be the best I've ever played with. He's probably a 7 or an 8. But Coach, really? I'll take you every day of the week, because he ain't gonna back down from anything. He ain't gonna back down from beating Georgia again this year.
I've never played golf with Butch Jones, but Tennessee's my school, so we'll have to get a foursome up.
Tennessee's your school. Yeah. Who do they open up against? Where?
By the way, I'm available anytime you want to go down to Augusta. We'll settle this.
I'm looking forward to watching Georgia Tech beat Tennessee in the opener in Atlanta.
We'll talk the next day. Charlie, many thanks.
Thank you.
What a pleasure. We'll keep an eye on your son. We'll be in Missouri early in the season, I believe. So thanks so much, Charlie Rymer from the Golf Channel, his son at the University of Missouri. We'll take a short break.
Number 9, Hayden Rymer.
All of you back. We'll get back to the phones at 855-242-7285 and check out Andrew in Tennessee. Good afternoon, Andrew. Welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you, Paul?
We are doing great. Thank you.
I just have 2 quick questions, one about Alabama and one about Tennessee and Butch Jones. The first about Alabama. Do you see Nick Saban finishing his coaching career at the collegiate level at Alabama, or do you see him getting tired of winning at Alabama and being so dominant and moving back to the pro level?
You know something, Andrew? I want you to do some research. If you find me a professional who gets tired of winning, please let me know. I want to talk to this guy. I don't see Saban doing anything other than what he's doing. I thought a couple of years ago maybe he could be enticed into a position of running a franchise or being a partial owner. I still wouldn't say that's an impossibility, but I don't think Nick Saban will ever coach anywhere other than Alabama.
I see that too, but I was reading some reports, and I I wanted to see what you thought on it. And the second question I have is about Butch Jones and the quarterback situation. If you're Butch Jones, and I've read, and I'm a Tennessee fan, of course, if you're Butch Jones and you have a junior in Quentin Dormady, and he's projected to start, and then you have this hype freshman in Garantino, whatever his name is,
Tano, yeah.
and you're risking, if you start Dormady, a transfer from Garantino. Do you start Garantino because you want to give him 4 years like you did Josh Dobbs? Because with 2 years, Josh Dobbs would not have been where he was. You can't develop in 2 years what you can in 4. Do you see him risking starting a junior and losing Garantino to a transfer? Possibly.
To your question, I felt like Nick Saban did that last year with Blake Barnett. He started him in the SC game so he wouldn't transfer. And, of course, he ended up transferring anyway, and now he's throwing shade at Saban. I can't answer that for Butch Jones. I don't want to give you the cliche, he's going to do what's best for the team, because that's not always what they do. They do what's best for themselves. But I think he'll take a good long look, and if one's better than the other, I think the debate is over. We'll take a short break. We have 3 hours to go.
You're listening to Love Advice with Leanne. Caller, you're on the air.
Hi, Leanne. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Why, in your professional opinion, do you never take my calls off the air?
Is this Carl?
Yep, it's Carl. I mean, we had a few dates. Everything was great. I thought,
Well, when you switch to Geico, you could save a lot of money on car insurance.
Okay, awesome.
You should call them.
I will.
Geico, because saving 15% or more on car insurance is always a great answer.
Oh, the show is live and underway. We had Charlie Rymer on during the first hour. Really fun conversation. Tomorrow, don't forget, we will have an opportunity to visit with Ross Bjork, the athletic director at Ole Miss, who will come 3 weeks to the day that he fired Hugh Freeze. Can't wait to hear what he has to say about that and the expected hearing with the Committee on Infractions. The word is the date has been set. Let's continue with more news before we get back to the calls. And Sports Illustrated, as we mentioned, is out with its top 25. There was a time when this was a showstopper. Everybody in the world of college football cared. Now it's just another story. Who's number one? Big surprise. The Tide. Florida State number 2. So we have a 1 versus 2 matchup according to Sports Illustrated. Ohio State and Oklahoma State. What are they doing at number 4? I've not seen them ranked so high. SC, Oklahoma, Clemson, Penn State, Washington, and Auburn. So the states of Oklahoma and Alabama, not exactly the 2 biggest states in the country, comprise 40% of the top 10. Michigan, Wisconsin, LSU ranked number 13, Louisville, Stanford, Georgia 16. Seems like Georgia's always 16. South Florida, K-State, Miami, West Virginia 21, Washington State, Texas, Virginia Tech, and Texas A&M. Not Texas, but Texas A&M at number 25. Texas is number 23. So the Aggies, in spite of a lot of doomsdayers, making the top 25. The big story there, seemed to me, was Oklahoma State in the top 5. Mike Gundy expected to have a very good season, and I would agree with that. Let's take some phone calls here at 855-242-7285. Landon in Tennessee is up next.
Hey, Paul.
Hi there.
I got a couple questions for you real quick. Just want to see what your prediction was for the Tennessee-Georgia Tech game, and who are you picking to win the SEC East?
I'd probably go with Florida, maybe by a hair over Georgia. Tough call, though. As far as Tennessee, Georgia Tech, I think if this game was third week in October or in November, I might give Georgia Tech more of a chance. I think Tennessee will not be surprised by anything they see from the triple option from Paul Johnson. Therefore, I'm going to give Tennessee a slight edge in this game.
All right. That's good to know. So you think the quarterback situation in Florida is going to work out with Malik Zaire?
That's what I think. Still getting conflicting stories on that. Matt Stinchcomb in here in a couple of minutes. We'll get his take, as well as Phil Steele a little bit later on. Ralph is next up in Fayette, Alabama. Hello, Ralph.
Hey, how you doing?
We are doing really well. Thank you for the call.
Good. Actually, from Donaldsonville, Georgia, working in Fayette, Alabama. Got a question for you about the benefits, like in players from the South that's going to a lot of these northern schools. Is the schools, can they, like the parents, can they pay for their trips, or can alumni help the family members go to those games?
No, and that's a big topic of conversation. I know in the college football playoff, the NCAA has allowed money for families, but unless I'm mistaken, I don't think anyone can aid a player's family for a regular season game.
I know just the expense of if a family member wants to go, just say parents or maybe siblings wants to go to some of the northern schools that's hitting the South real hard on recruits. I just wonder if they're not going, which I don't think that's the case, and the financial burden of plane tickets, place to stay, food. I mean, you're looking at thousands of dollars per trip to one of those schools. So to me, it looks like there's something kind of could be suspicious in that area right there.
That's a fair point, Ralph. Let me dig into that a little bit more before I make too much of a declaration. But I don't think right now there's any way to help. Appreciate the call. Gooch.
Hey,
is
Paul.
Up next in Mississippi. How are you, Gooch?
Hey, man, I'm doing great. I just wanted to talk to you. Yesterday, a caller called in, just, putting down Ole Miss, saying that there's no reason we should be able to have a top signing class without cheating. And I just wondered, any of these people from these bigger programs have ever been to Oxford, Mississippi?
I don't know. I have, and
it's a wonderful community.
Place. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's what I was talking about. And now, if I had a child and I was sending him off to college, and I looked at every SEC school, there's no place safer and more quaint and nice to send your child to college. And I just don't understand this narrative that all these other programs say, well, Ole Miss can't get a player to come to their school. Well, it's a great place to go to college. I'm a third-generation graduate, and these things have improved around here so much in the last 15 or 20 years that, I'm just tired of hearing these people that don't understand that we can be on a level, maybe not like Alabama, but we could be a good program.
Gooch, I think you raise a fair point. I think the big criticism wasn't so much that Oxford isn't a nice place. It is. I think the big criticism came from how did Hugh Freeze, out of nowhere, suddenly land some of the players that he did 4 years ago.
Yeah, well, look at the allegations.
From Chicago, from other parts of the country. That's why so many red flags went up, and Hugh Freeze didn't help matters by that tweet, as you probably remember.
Yeah, but you read the allegations. Not one of. I don't think any of those are part of the charges.
Yeah, certainly. Tunsil came in for some issues with that car, I believe, but I don't think that was the biggest part of this. No.
Yeah, but you see what I'm saying.
I do. I get it.
But look back at what Orgeron did. Orgeron recruited great. He just doesn't know how to coach on the field back then. I mean, he had some wonderful players. Look at how many of his players in the NFL.
By the way, Gooch, I think there are still some people wondering whether he can coach.
I'm sure he's going to do much better now that he's got more experience.
Well, he's got a better staff now too.
He had so many talented players on his team, but he got them here because all you got to do is get a kid to come to town. I mean, it is literally one of the nicest. You can literally walk anywhere you need to go. It's not a cesspool like Baton Rouge in some places is, and Tuscaloosa can be a rough place. But, I mean, Oxford is just a wonderful community. I could live anywhere in this country, but I choose to live here because it is a wonderful place to live.
Gooch, let me say this. I've been there a lot of times lately, and I ran into more people in Oxford that I've met from somewhere else, and I would say to this individual, what are you doing here? He said, well, I retired and I moved here. I said, yeah, but you're from Georgia. You're from Florida. You know what I'm talking about because you live there.
Right.
Yeah, I think you've raised some fair points. Listen, we're about to find out, Gooch. The NCAA committee in the next 5 or 6 weeks will hear this case. This nightmare will either be over or continuing. So which one, I do not know. Have my theories. Alex is in Tallahassee, and you are next up. Hey, Alex.
Hey, man. How's it going?
Really well. Thanks for the call.
Thanks. So I got a quick story for you. So I'm an FSU fan, obviously. I went to the Clemson game a couple years ago and got kicked out by some fans and completely sober. And the Clemson cop, I was talking to him, and I was like, this is absolutely biased. I'm Clemson, I'm an FSU fan of Clemson territory or Clemson cop who's probably from Clemson. Do you think that these smaller schools have an advantage these schools in a smaller town have an advantage over schools in a bigger town, such as, even FSU or like a Georgia Tech compared to an Alabama and Tuscaloosa or Clemson and Clemson, South Carolina for their players getting in trouble and such?
So do you think the smaller towns have an advantage over the bigger cities? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yes, I do. And I've always found that the bigger the college town, the less control, and I'm say this sincerely, the less control the school has over the police department.
Mm-hmm.
In a really small town, and I know this may not be today, but I know it has happened in the past, if a player got in trouble, they would call an assistant coach. They always left the head coach out, so he had some deniability. But they would call an assistant coach and say, hey, we got one of your guys up here, and the coach would say, I'll be right up there. In a bigger city, there's always more tension. Sometimes because there is a campus police unit, there are fewer of those than there used to be. But in years ago, you may remember, almost every college campus had its own security police. So there were turf battles. Most places don't have that anymore, or at least I don't think they do.
Well, in Tallahassee, we kind of do here.
Yeah.
But, if we just go back to around, 2012, 2013 and the Jameis Winston thing, and everyone's saying TPD is covering it up, Tallahassee's a college town. But people forget Tallahassee's the state capital.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not a small town. And it's
Alex,
funny
I remember, I can't remember the DA's name, the one that everyone thought was in the tank for Jameis, but I do remember talking to him one time, and he actually had the opposite reputation, did he not, of being too hard on Florida State players.
Yeah, he absolutely did. But then you have these networks that just single him out. If I recall correctly, at the same time this was going on, an Alabama tight end got busted for having pounds of marijuana in his room, and he didn't hear anything about that. So I don't know what.
Well, I mean, it is a fact that the smaller the police department, the easier it is to control. I vaguely remember when Saban got to Alabama. He had a number of players arrested, and I'm not making this statement. All I'm doing is presenting a fact. It wasn't long afterwards that the police chief was gone.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Well,
I'm sure he just decided to retire. But I used to know the sheriff in Tuscaloosa County, and he did tell me, he's no longer there, that it is a balancing act between the county, the city, and the police department, the head football coach in the operation. Hey, thanks for the call. Appreciate it very, very much. Matt Stinchcomb will be with us a little bit later. Phil Steele taking your phone calls. Ross Bjork tomorrow. Stick around. We welcome you back. Glad you're with us. Matt Stinchcomb will join us shortly. We'll also have Phil Steele a little bit later on. Let's get back to the calls at 855-242-7285. A couple of guests. We have not had as much time as usual, but we will make up for that beginning right now. George from California, you are on the air.
Yeah, I didn't as much have a question. I just wanted to kind of make a statement. I sat here in San Clemente and watched everything pour out yesterday. I think Larry from Shelby, North Carolina, I just remember a big old red shirt and a real small white head. And a whole bunch of stuff coming out about California this, California that. I'm in a unique place. I know Sam Darnold. I know his, as you say, his plumber father. I know how hard these guys work, what they put in, coming all the way up. My son was actually in his mother's class in 6th grade. And, I've also had the unique experience of traveling around the Southeast, going to football games, watching all the people interact. And I can't tell you that you wouldn't know it from your caller base at times, but there's not a more gracious, more welcoming, more open fan base than when you go to Georgia or you go to Auburn or you go to South Carolina or Kentucky. They see you. You have the opposing gear on. They take one poke at you, and then with the same hand that they poked at you, they're pulling you into their tent. They're giving you food. They're giving you refreshment. I've been lucky enough to run a program at Ole Miss by choice, and the people there are incredible, honorable, hardworking. Can't say enough about the SEC. And when you sit out in California and you listen to what you listened to yesterday, when there was just a kid trying to make a point, I'm glad you gave me an opportunity just to kind of.
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, George, I've had the pleasure of staying in San Clemente many years ago. I thought it was. I understand why Nixon chose it. It's a beautiful place, and I was castigated yesterday for saying I like California, but that's okay. I'll take it.
Well, and I've been at UCLA games. I mean, they throw down that when Arizona State beats them, they go, well, you only accepted 32,000 people the last 3 years in your school. We accepted 6, and that's a little bit of the UCLA thing, and it's less so at Cal and less so at USC. But as an SEC lover from afar, I would say that all of you guys got to appreciate what's going on at Vanderbilt. You don't hear a Derek Mason. You don't hear any of those teammates. You don't hear any of those coaches throwing that down. They're saying, hey, we got what we got, and we're coming to play. And, I think the Pac-12 plays some pretty good football. But, I was a little bit disappointed in some of the representation from some of the guys yesterday because it's not what I've seen in the SEC at all. And I just wanted to get that out there.
Glad you did, George. Thank you.
I was lucky enough. I'll finish up, but I was lucky enough for 6 months to travel around in a car, and I went through Tupelo and all the way through Destin, all through Florida, every square inch of the SEC. And I can't say but 1 or 2 days that I had anybody, but Tennessee. When you get east and. But they love their teams, and they love their football, and you know what? They love themselves, and there's pride, and there's honor, and how can you blame anybody for that? So thank you for giving me the time.
Thank you, George. I hope you'll call back again. Good stuff. Joe is in Red Bay.
Good afternoon, Paul. How are you?
What's up?
Well, I would like to respond to something that to something that Rick had said yesterday, and I also got just a little bit of comment for you. Disappointed in. I'm going to save that for last because if I say that first, you'll hang up on me. So just please let me to Rick. Now, Rick was talking about when he came on. He said the last 2 callers was clowns and don't represent. Well, I never said no. That was the other caller that said that the UCLA quarterback couldn't make it in the SEC. I think there's a lot of schools that can make it at. I was offended by the comments that the quarterback had made, and but Rick to call me a clown. I mean, he's the one being a freaking baboon, butt-faced idiot, pretty much.
Hold on a second, Joe. What was that again?
bamboo face idiot.
Well, no, I thought you said a butt face bamboo.
Yeah, he's a baboon butt face idiot. Now he called me a name first. He said both of us, and so I just want to put that out there that that's been normal. I mean, when somebody insinuates that your team is dumb, I mean that's a normal reaction to not like that, and so that's not a clown. And I got to say that there's probably more Alabama fans that agree with me than him, because I'm not going to just let that go by. The kid said something because he'd never have to work playing Alabama. So it may make him look big out there saying he's wolfing up to somebody that he ain't even got to have a crap with, Paul.
You came off maybe just a tad parochial saying what you did.
Is that good?
Well, let me put it this way. You came off like someone who doesn't acknowledge that there is a world beyond your state.
Well, there is, but I don't poke fun a lot at the other. I mean, I know they're relevant. They know they're relevant, but I mean, it's just something the kid said. I guess I'm not going to I'm not going to sit and study over that too much because it really doesn't matter what he says because, like I said, he's wolfing up against a team that he's never going to have to play, and so that's all that is. But Rick to call it, the other guy may have been a clown by saying the guy can't play in the SEC, but I'm definitely no clown.
You also said you acted like this player couldn't play anywhere else, couldn't play in your area of the country, and I mean that came off pretty short-sighted.
Well, Paul, the way I look at it is, there's an SEC he could play at. I wouldn't trade Jalen Hurts for him because Jalen Hurts plays against some of the best defenses in the country.
Yeah.
I mean, he plays against Pac-12 defenses that, they study on points and not really stopping points.
Well, I don't know. You ever watch Stanford play? They got a pretty salty defense most of the time. Not last year, but most of the time.
Yeah,
So what was your problem with me? You wanted to save it at the end because you were concerned I might hang up on you if you brought it up early.
Well, it's just any time that, most of the comments I make at Big Ten or Pac-12, it's usually something that, they started. And it's just like, you kind of become just a little bit wishy-washy, Paul. It's like you speak up for the SEC, but then you talk like, well, that's the best conferences they are. And I don't agree with it. Penn State and Wisconsin, as far as I'm concerned, is all that the Big Ten has. Ohio State's relevant.
Joe, I mean, I'm employed by a global company to give my opinion, not to give an opinion that is predetermined or predisposed for me. I try to look at things objectively. I know people laugh when I say that, but I do.
Well, I mean,
I'm afraid if I do that, though, you're going to call me a baboon, butt-faced idiot.
No, just a little wishy-washy, Paul. Just a little bit of wishy-washy poo there. That's all.
How am I being wishy-washy? Because I praised Josh Rosen as opposed to throwing him under your 1955 bus.
Well, let me put it like this. First week of football, Alabama's going to take care of Florida State. Florida's going to take care of Michigan.
Yeah, just like Alabama took care of Clemson. You told me that the week of the game as well.
Well, they did one year.
They didn't last year though, and that's the year I'm talking about.
Well, it's kind of ironic.
I mean, you Alabama fans act like you've never done anything wrong. I mean, listen, no one can argue with success. But you also have to deal with reality, and there are other schools and there are other conferences that play college football, Joe.
Well, I think this is, the SEC has been, but the quarterbacks that's coming in now are actually pretty decent.
And you think they're better than the ones out west?
Yeah, I think we're actually catching up.
How can you say that?
Well, I mean, we've got quarterbacks, even some from out west coming, like even Tua from Hawaii.
Well, he hasn't played it down yet. I'm talking about guys like Darnold. I'm talking about guys like Rosen, other players in the Pac-12. I mean, here's what bugs me, Joe. I'm all for promoting the brand, okay? But let's not be disingenuous, and let's not be ignorant. Let's not come off like a baboon, butt-faced idiot, okay? We'll be right back. Betterbuilt, makers of America's original aluminum truck toolbox, brings you a variety of truck toolboxes to fit your truck and your lifestyle. Head to betterbuilt.com for more information. With Matt Stinchcomb, I was asking you during the break about I think it was on SI.com to give proper attribution. These two correspondents were debating how boring Alabama's dynasty has become. And on one level, it is. I read the new poll out today from Sports Illustrated, and Alabama number one.
It is. Look, the idea that you think that you know how the season's going to end up. So it's who is Alabama going to play for the national title? That is a boring concept. I mean, I am appreciative of the fact that Clemson was able to get a national title. I like the fact that Ohio State was able to win a national title, albeit under this new arrangement of the college football playoff. The whole idea years ago under the BCS was to nationalize the game. Let's get away from these regionalized ideas that, our part of the country is better than your part of the country. Let's actually play these games in a national title game. Right. So that's no longer this fictional national championships. And so the fact that there's some semblance of balance, I don't know if it's geographic balance, given the fact that it's been Clemson, Alabama back-to-back years, is a good thing. It's a good thing for college football. I think it's good for fan interest. And I think the folks that are outside of this conference and maybe didn't even participate or coach, maybe they don't appreciate just how remarkable it is to be as dominant as Alabama as a program has been really since, not just the dawning of the BCS era, but from 2006 on.
I say this to a Georgia man, but they've only won one of the last 4 national championships.
Right. Just the one. Yeah, golly. Are you talking about from like a Georgia perspective? Is that something?
I do want to ask you about Georgia because start with Eason, and let's just start with Eason.
Sure. Well, I mean, a lot starts with Eason. I mean, you look at it, it's such a highly touted, and I think it's not debatable. The skill set is there. The arm talent would be there. How it has translated on the field, I don't think many people would want it to be replicated again this year from the Georgia program. They don't want to see a similar performance in that there are throws that should be made that weren't, overthrows, underthrows, reads that were poorly made. And just the general operation of the offense. So you're asking a guy to do some things offensively that are different from what they were doing in high school. He's looking to the sideline. Now he's in a huddle. He's taking shots from snaps from shotgun. Now he has to get under center. Just the mechanics of those, all those boxes have now been checked. He should be comfortable with that. And they're going to need some semblance of a passing game because you saw an underperforming offensive line a year ago, but with no downfield threat, and defenses could easily just collapse on a run game that basically vanished. And you've got 2 very talented, if not among the most talented backs in Sony Michel and Nick Chubb, who were rendered basically useless offensively. You saw it versus Florida where they basically abandoned the run, so we just can't do it anymore. These defenses did not feel threatened by any other element of the offense, and it starts with that quarterback and his ability to at least find some of those targets downfield, and the wide receiver's got to step up to complement it.
You go from Georgia's quarterback situation, which there are criticism of, but it's settled, at least for now, to Florida, where everyone has an opinion and everyone knows someone who knows someone,
of course,
who knows who the quarterback will be.
Yeah, the whispers in the quarterback room, of course. Somebody's got a buddy who's an equipment manager, who's a roommate with somebody who knows that Malik Zaire has the edge. What's so interesting to me is, and it makes sense that there's that much attention around that position. We all know that we've seen entire coaching staffs, eras end. Florida's probably maybe the best example. If you don't have an answer at quarterback, no matter how good your coach is, he might not last, and your team might not achieve at a level that they otherwise should have. Will Muschamp knows that better than anybody, and he'll bring it up. You got to have a quarterback. Jim McElwain has kind of debunked that in the SEC East, where he's saying, I might need to start a season with a quarterback. I don't necessarily have to finish the season with a quarterback. I don't even have to keep my quarterback. He might transfer, and I'll pick up another one. This year, the idea that Malik Zaire has that element, more of a run element to his game, I think in today's game, the way it is, despite what I think will be one of the better offensive fronts, it's certainly a much improved offensive front in Florida, to have that run element, to have the mobility at the quarterback position, because the defensive lines are so much better, I think, than the offensive fronts, frankly. That is an appealing aspect to have at your disposal. And if you're a guy like Jim McElwain, who has obviously operated independent of that skill set before, that would be an attractive toy. But Malik Zaire, you look at him from a career production standpoint, he comes walking onto that campus. Do you anoint him your starter right away? Obviously, they're going to say there's a competition existing. I read somewhere the other day that Malik Zaire's got the edge. That must have been, another one of those, hey, I ran into a guy at a bus stop.
I saw somebody yesterday who told me he had talked to somebody.
Did he? Where did he talk to him? Was it in the cereal aisle at Publix or something?
Frozen foods.
Yeah, frozen foods. That's where all the scuttlebutt's going on, Paul.
Okay, we're moving through the East because we don't pay as much attention to it as maybe we should. But Tennessee has not settled his quarterback position. It doesn't seem like Tennessee's really settled anything. Your take?
I think this is going to be a really tough year for Tennessee. I feel like last year was Tennessee's year, and it wasn't. I felt like when you look at that roster, that needed to be a division title for the Tennessee program. If you're looking at it in a 2-year window, obviously it's never really lined up, or it hasn't, at least under Butch Jones. Some of that is, the residue from a previous coaching staff where you had an offensive front that had to learn on the job, which this is arguably the toughest conference to do that in, that now actually has some experience. The problem is that that's incongruent with some of your skill position, and specifically at the quarterback spot. So I think that, that given an underperforming defense, a defense that struggled, I think more than many thought it would, even though the East is attainable, even though the East is accessible, I think it's going to be a tough road to hoe for Tennessee this year.
Year 5, which this is, not to put any unneeded pressure, but, shouldn't you begin to define your program by year 5?
That's the idea.
If you get to year 5.
Yeah, if you get to year 5, right? This conference, right, it's either if you're not contending for a national title in the second year, it's what's going on.
Exactly.
And it's been attained by others. But, no question. It's true of Tennessee. You look at Brett Bielema. He's been on the job now 5 years. Yeah. That pressure, that's kind of a quiet scenario.
I hear people say,
West.
if you take away the national championship appearance from Malzahn, well, you can't.
No, you can't. Exactly. If you act as if a national title contention season, that just didn't happen. Well, you can't really do that, I'm afraid.
But if you take it away, it's pretty average. We'll take your phone calls. I'll bring in Matt and let him find out what we go through every day on the show after this. Stinchcomb with us, and we will get some phone calls in here for him and expose him to what we have to.
Should I go boil a mouthpiece, Paul? Is that what you're telling me?
Austin in Lexington with Matt Stinchcomb right here on the program. Good afternoon.
Hey, Paul, I got 2 questions for you. First one, you look at Kentucky's schedule, and they got more talent, but the road's always been through Florida. For 30 years, we haven't been able to get through Florida. But if you look at South Carolina and Florida, the 3rd and 4th games of the season, if they can get through those 2, what does that mean for the rest of their season?
Well, you look at Kentucky. I'm pretty high on Kentucky, and the context for any East Division team is that there isn't a dominant program right now. That's not meant as a slight to the Florida teams that have been able to win that division a couple of years. But yeah, if you look at if that scenario plays out the way you just described it, Austin. Then to me, you're looking at a Kentucky Wildcat team that might get their first swing at an East Division title. I'm not certain that they're able to accomplish that. What's challenging to me in the East Division this year is that, the East-West comparison, outside of Alabama, if you look at some of those contests a season ago, the intra-conference contests, the East fared pretty well versus the West Division. But you got to be, exclusive of what are the more dominant programs. For Kentucky this year, They got to be so much better on the defensive front than they were a year ago. They've made changes there. They got a new defensive line coach in there. Obviously, they're transitioning at the defensive coordinator position. Mark Stoops, more engaged in that regard. I think there's opportunity. I still think that Kentucky has to play over their heads to win that division title. But, and it's a season ago. Finally you get to the postseason. You are one catch away, a very catchable ball. It ends up being a drop ball versus Georgia from getting a Georgia victory. I mean, you look at the victories. They got a walk-off field goal victory over Mississippi State in a loss versus the Bulldogs. It's a team that is kind of teetered. They got to the postseason. And if they can somehow survive that stretch, as you just described, the South Carolina-Florida games, then, yeah, I mean, the East Division is there because you have a hard time. Kentucky and South Carolina, to me, are the dark horse candidates in the East Division. They would have defeated one. They would have defeated what is arguably one of the top two teams in the East Division anyway, in the conference in Florida. You got Georgia sitting out there, and depending on what their schedule looks like and their win-loss record at the time, I
really like their. Obviously, they play Mississippi State every year, but they have Mississippi State and Ole Miss. I mean, that's hard to get any better than that.
It's the best draw you can get out of the West Division, and if like Austin's laying out, if they're able to get through Florida and South Carolina unscathed, then you're facing Georgia late in the season, and depending on what's happened with Georgia, who obviously they're going to get a draw out of the West that is more formidable in that you've got Mississippi State, that's a winnable football game. Then you got Auburn, and Auburn saying people are saying, and maybe rightfully so, that Auburn might be the only team that could topple Alabama in the West Division this year. That's a tougher draw. Yeah. So if Kentucky can get through that, I mean, the folks in Big Blue Nation, they can actually start becoming big-time football fans for the first time in a long time.
It's a little better than LSU's draw on the other side, going to Tennessee and Florida.
Not ideal. Hey, listen, LSU.
Some of it's their own fault. But.
Yeah, they brought the Florida thing on themselves, I'm afraid, and it didn't work out last year. It's going to be even more challenging this year. The homecoming thing, a lot's been made of that, but LSU, a lot of people are fired up about LSU. I think it's inarguable about the talent that is there. There's a ton of transition that's gone on over there. And it's not just at the head coaching spot. And now you're bringing in a new offensive coordinator. And then you look at some of the not only attrition due to graduation, the NFL draft is always a concern in Baton Rouge, but now injury. The offensive line perhaps is not going to be as strong as it was a season ago. I thought it was kind of shaky coming into the year. Darius Geis is a singular talent, a really good football player. There's depth behind him. Is there game-changing talent?
Down there before.
They have. And at wide receiver, you're really unproven. DJ Chark is a guy. And what does he look like in Matt Canada's offense? I'm sure he probably has an expanded role with, his usage of fly sweeps, et cetera. But you don't have known commodities out wide. The defense has always carried them. Are they good enough to do what some have said they would be capable of doing and beating in Alabama or maybe even at Auburn this year in that West Division? I think that's asking a lot of this LSU program, especially under what is the first year as a head coach at LSU anyway, and Ed Ogeron.
Matt Sinchcomb, you'll see him later on SEC Now. You need to do this more often. I mean, you just handle these calls with great aplomb.
Well, I filibustered Austin.
Call.
Filibuster that Kentucky call.
Thanks so much. Phil Steele, he'll deal with some callers as well. And more to come. Don't forget Ross Bjork tomorrow on this program. We're coming right back.
Daddy, where do babies come from?
Honey?
Mommy went to the store.
Oh, well, you see, there's a mommy and a daddy, right?
Right.
And see, when they call Geico, they could save a bunch of money on car insurance.
Oh, really? And that makes them happy?
Yes, that makes them very happy.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we could have this talk, Sunshine.
Geico, because saving 15% or more on car insurance is always a great answer.
We welcome you back. A couple weeks ago when we were, I think it was around the holidays, many of you may have been away. Phil Steele from the Phil Steele magazine and now a new ESPN analyst joined us taking phone calls, and we had quite a rip-roaring hour, and we're going to do that again now that we're getting a little bit closer to the beginning of college football season. Phil, it's always a great pleasure to welcome you to our program, and look forward to repeating what we had here a couple of weeks ago. Thank you so much. Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, Paul, and want to remind the listeners out there, feel free. 130 teams out there. Ask me about any one of them. I'll get your answers for you.
Okay, we're going to lock Phil in here in a minute and start taking your phone calls. But, Phil, we're about a week and a half into camp. Not much has happened. What are you watching for now as we do that slow crawl toward the beginning of the college football season? What can change now?
I guess about the only major thing in my mind, Paul, is maybe who wins some of the tighter quarterback battles out there, who emerges as the starters. But not a lot is going to change in the month. And I'll remind callers of the, and listeners of the 2014. Remember, Ohio State was picked very high, and then all of a sudden Braxton Miller was out for the year, and everybody said, well, Ohio State can't win. Came in picked second in the East. That year, Ohio State ended up winning the national title. So don't overreact to one player being out for the year. Football's a team sport.
Phil Steele is with us. We certainly can blow the air about any subject, me, not Phil. But I want Phil to be able to talk to you because it's a rare chance to get a chance to talk to him. The phone number is 855-242-7285, 855-242-7285. Why don't we start running through the calls and start with Frank in California for Phil Steele. Many thanks to the call. Let's go right ahead, Frank. You're on with Phil.
Hello.
Hello, Frank.
This is Frank.
Go right ahead. You're on with Phil Steele.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I was wondering if Alabama was going to play against Oklahoma for the championship. Do you think Oklahoma has a chance?
All right, appreciate the call, Frank. And, a matchup like that would be a long ways away, but let's assume that they are playing for the national title. I would say Oklahoma would have a chance. They'd have a quarterback in Baker Mayfield. That offensive line, I rate number one in the country at the end of the season this year, and they would have been playing at that level. And then really your biggest question mark you have with Oklahoma would be, A, how's Lincoln Riley going to fare as a head coach since they're in the title game? I'm going to say they're doing pretty well. And secondly, the defense, will it be improved? And once again, if they're in the title game, they've got the talent on that side of the ball, they would be improved. I think anybody that lines up with Alabama in the national title game would have a chance. So I think it'd be a great game. Appreciate the call, Frank.
Thank you very much, Frank. Good to hear from you. Let's go to Lance next from Tennessee. Lance, you are on with Phil Steele, just out the 2017 Phil Steele college football preview.
Oh, man, I got the book. I really appreciate your love for the Gators this year. I ain't heard it in a while. But tell me this, a lot of people feel like the defense is going to slack off, but I would argue that they replace them with a all-SEC collaborator at every level of the defense. How do you feel about the defense for the Gators coming in?
I feel last year when you look at Florida that they had a legitimate top 10 defense. This year they may be a shade outside the top 10, but still a top 20 defense. And I think the big difference with Florida is going to be that they actually have an offense this year. I project them going from 23 points per game, which they've averaged the last 2 years, up to 33. But let's focus on the defense because that's what your question was about. Last year's injuries, I think, really help out a lot because you got a guy like Jabari Zuniga who was thrown into the fire last year as a freshman, had to play, ended up starting 4 games. He had 6 sacks last year. Kylan Johnson was forced into action. David Reese. A whole bunch of those freshmen had to play last year, and I think that's going to help them this year. Overall, talent-wise, I'm going to say just a notch below last year, but the offense is much improved, and I rate their special teams number 3. Appreciate the call, Lance.
Oh, okay, thanks.
We go from Lance to Daryl. Daryl is in Columbus, Georgia for Phil Steele. Daryl?
Yes. Hey, Phil, I want to get – let me say this. I don't think it matters who comes out of the East anyway. Nobody's going to beat Alabama. They're just too loaded. I mean, they're too loaded on defense. Just got too many players. But I want to get your opinion on the player that they got in trouble and did not get suspended by Nick Saban. I want to get your thoughts on that. Because my opinion is the law is the law. It don't matter how you interpret it. And I think Saban has to send a message to the rest of the team. And at least
hold on a second. We're talking about Deshaun Hand, and I mean Phil's here to answer specific football questions, not to give opinions on suspensions or not. I answered your question yesterday. Do you have a specific question that Phil could help you with?
No, that's what I called to talk about. I'll call back in because I want to finish my conversation with you in reference to that. All right.
I will ask you that about Deshaun Hand, though, forgetting whether he'll play in the game or not, which he will. How important is he, Phil?
Well, I think Hand is very important, especially early in the season, Paul. I like the depth on the defensive line, but there's a lot of guys that are untested. They've got Isaiah Buggs behind him, a guy that's just getting better each and every day. So, I mean, there's good talent, but if I'm Alabama, I'd prefer to have Deshaun Hand in the lineup along with Daron Payne up front. I think that would help. So I think overall a big part of that defensive line for Alabama.
Thank you very much for the call. Ray in Knoxville, you're on with Phil Steele. Go right ahead.
Hey, Paul. How you doing, buddy?
We are doing great. Thank you very much.
All right, yeah, there was a comment made about the Vols earlier by Matt Stinchcomb. You know, he said the quarterbacks weren't going to be that good, so he
Ray, Matt Stinchcomb was on. He was not very positive on Tennessee. Your outlook on the Vols?
You know, I think Tennessee's an under-the-radar team this year, Ray, because last year all the hype was there, and they didn't quite live up to it. Remember the massive amount of injuries they did suffer on the defensive side of the ball. I think that hurt them down the stretch, especially when they were giving up the 740 yards to Missouri, 608 to Vanderbilt, games like that. So I think overall, when you look at Tennessee defensively, 7 starters back, a lot of guys got forced in the lineup last year. They'll be stronger there. And offensively, you know, Quentin Dormady, Jarrett Garantino, those are a couple of guys that I think can come in and play. They're not going to be the type of a running quarterback Josh Dobbs was. They're not going to have the senior leadership, but I think they can get stuff done. You look at the schedule this year, it's what concerns me. They have to play Florida on the road. They draw both Alabama and LSU out of the West, which is difficult. They also have a couple other tough games this year, but I'm looking at a Tennessee team that can get to 8-9 wins, match last year's record, a lot less hype on them, so I think they're under the radar coming into the season. And if you want to know whether or not they can contend for the East, watch that September 16th game in the Swamp. If they somehow come out of there with a win, they're a contender. If not, it's probably a battle for second place. Appreciate the call, Ray.
You bet. Ron is up next in Texas. Ron, you are on with Phil Steele.
Well, Paul, I actually called to talk to you about some stuff, but I'll ask Phil a question.
Well, thank you.
How
Appreciate
in the world, and if you'll put me on hold after this call, I'd love to come back. I'm a first-time caller, and I'm really excited about beginning a dialogue with you. I'm a 65-year-old Aggie in Texas. But let's talk about Texas. And I don't hate Texas. I've got a daughter that graduated from there. Everybody's picking Tom Herman in Texas to be so good. They have to play USC, Oklahoma, Okie State, West Virginia, TCU. That's 5 losses. They could lose to Maryland and K-State. What do you think, Phil?
I think you're going to be mildly surprised with Texas this year. I think they're going to perform better than expected. You look at the overall talent this team has, and I'm going to single out the defensive line and defensive backs. These are 2 units that are just loaded with talent. They look great coming off the bus. They've got size, they've got speed, they've got athleticism that you want for those 2 units, yet they've underperformed the last couple of years. I think Todd Orlando steps into a good situation as a defensive coordinator. He'll get them living up to their talent level on the defense. I don't think they'll be dominant, but they'll be much improved over last year's D, which gave up over 31 points per game. Offensively, I mean, Tom Herman's got Shane Bussell back, Chris Warren at running back, an offensive line with 3 starters back up front as well. They've got talent. And the one thing I really like about Tom Herman is when he was at Houston, a group of 5 conference, they play 6 ranked teams. He got them to beat all 6 ranked teams. So he gets the most out of the talent on hand. I think he'll get a lot out of Texas. I think they're a contender in the Big 12 this year. They'll clearly have a winning record, but I do think they'll fall a little short of winning the Big 12. But a much improved year if you're a Texas fan. I know that's not what you wanted to hear, Ron.
Hastings is in Tuscaloosa. Hastings, you are next up for Phil.
Hey, Phil. I called once again to discuss something with Paul, but I actually got a good question for you. So this quarterback race in Auburn and the competition between Jarrett Stidham and Sean White, I think, is a little bit more competitive than people realize. if they're able to get it together, how do you see their season going and their success rate by the time they play Alabama in the final game in November? And do you think they have an opportunity to potentially move into the SEC West and have a shot to enter the playoffs?
Well, I think any champion of the SEC has a shot of making the playoffs, regardless if they lose to Clemson early in the year or not. And if Jarrett Stidham, and as much as it is a quarterback competition right now, or so says Gus Malzahn, Jarrett Stidham is going to be your starting quarterback. He's got Petway and Johnson at running back to work with, a solid offensive line. And I think underrated for Auburn this year is the defense. Last year they gave up just 17.1 points per game. They've got 7 starters back. I rate them with my number 10 D-line, number 14 linebackers, number 11 DBs. And how about the special teams? Another underrated group. When you got a kicker like Daniel Carlson, you've got one of the better special teams units out there. I think if any team this year beats Alabama in the SEC, it would be Auburn in the Iron Bowl. They get that game at home. It's week 12 of the season. It's a rivalry game. So of all the SEC teams during the regular season, I give them the best shot of beating Alabama. And that game right there could very well determine the West. I think it's going to be a very good year for Auburn. Appreciate the call, Hastings.
We continue with Phil Steele. We are flying out of the chute. Great opportunity to talk some pretty hardcore ball with Phil Steele and get some response. Any team in the country is available for your questions, and we will continue with Phil after this message. Phil Steele back on the program here. We welcome everyone back. We'll get Phil locked in and get your phone calls ready to roll at 855-242-7285. Joe is in Pennsylvania. Joe, welcome to our program. Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, Paul. Good afternoon, Phil. Hey, got a big question, if you guys could answer it. I'm a Big Ten guy, of course, up here, but Alabama football, Bo Scarborough, what is his status at this point? Is he healthy?
Yeah, Bo is definitely healthy, and I think he'll be close to, if not 100% for the season. But I wouldn't put him in a Heisman contender list because I think Alabama's got too many good running backs like Damian Harris and Najee Harris back there at running back, where they're going to end up splitting carries. It's dangerous. I think Alabama's got the best set of running backs in the country this year. Even a guy like Josh Jacobs, 4th string, loaded at running back. But I think you're going to see three dynamic guys.
Najee Harris, because what I hear from Tuscaloosa, I'm curious what you hear. People are just salivating over this young man.
Any other team in the country, Paul, he's probably starting. I mean, he is that good. He's 6'2", 227. He's got the size, got the speed, and I think he's going to have a dynamic year. But like I said, I wouldn't put on any one of these Alabama running backs a chance to win the Heisman because I feel they're going to be splitting the carries this year. And it's a great problem for Nick Saban to have is how do you keep all three guys happy?
Well done. Thank you, Joe, for the phone call. Another Joe in Tennessee. You're on with Phil Steele. Go right ahead.
Yes, sir. I'd like to speak to the SEC Nation and tell them that here in Knoxville, when you come to a game here, we're your host and you're a visitor in our house. And as far as I know, we try to be friendly to any team that comes into our house.
Good deal, Joe. Thanks for that. You have a question for Phil?
Sir. I'd like to know what he thinks about Josh's chance in the NFL, if he agrees with Gruden, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on what Tennessee may or may not do as close as Buster Jones plays his cards to his vest.
Okay, thank you very much.
Appreciate it, Joe. I like the Georgia Tech game at the start of the year and the fact that they get to practice defending the option the entire month of August, so I think that's a good advantage there. The Florida game is going to be huge. The Georgia game at home, I feel, is going to be huge. And if what you say, Joe, which is about Tennessee and the home crowd, they take care of business at home this year. They've got the potential to easily match last year's 9-win total and be a contender in the East. As far as Dobbs in the NFL, I think it's going to be a little bit of a developmental project. I don't think he can step into the NFL right now and start the first year or two, but he's got the tools there, just needs to be developed. Appreciate the call, Joe.
Thank you very much. We'll continue with more calls. Sky is in Birmingham. Sky, you're next with Phil Steele.
Hey, Phil. Former Auburn head coach Pat Dye was quoted as saying a couple weeks ago that this is the most talent he's ever seen on the Auburn offensive line. So I wanted to ask you about that, and I also wanted to ask you, what is Clemson going to look like in the post-Deshaun Watson era? What are they going to look like this year compared to last? I'll hang up and listen. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'm very high on Auburn's offensive line. In fact, I rate them number 6 in the country. That's quite a statement from Pat Dye. I didn't read that particular statement, but if he said that, he's had some pretty talented offensive lines at Auburn. Now, granted, players today are bigger, stronger, faster than they were 20 years ago, and it is an impressive-looking offensive line, but I do feel one of the best in the country. And here's the thing about Clemson. I think they're being a little underrated heading into the year. When most folks break down a team, they look at the quarterback, running back, and receivers. And if you do that with Clemson, well, they lose Deshaun Watson. They lose their top running back, Wayne Gallman. They lose their top wide receiver, and Mike Williams. They lose their tight end, and Jordan Leggett. This team's in a rebuilding mode. But when I look at Clemson, I see a team that's only had 3 and 4 returning starters on defense the last 2 years, and yet been dominant. This year they've got 7 starters back on D. I feel the best defensive line in the country. Linebackers and DBs are there, and also offensive line, very strong. Number 5, I rate him in the country. The running back, I think Tavian Feaster can top Gallman's stats. Talking to the offensive coordinator Jeff Scott last year, he's really high on this receiving core. So the big question is quarterback. Who's going to replace Watson is the big question, but they get Florida State at home. They get Auburn at home, and they may be favored in every game this season by the time the season ends up. So don't fall asleep on Clemson despite the losses of the skilled players. Appreciate the call, Sky.
Let's continue with more calls. Phil is in Georgia with Phil Steele. Go right ahead.
Hey, I just have questions about Jacob Eason and Georgia's offense, and if you think that if Jacob Eason is going to live up to potential, maybe does he have chances of winning Heisman this year, maybe even next year, or?
Yeah, and the fun thing about the Heisman, Phil, is that you generally have to top last year's stats. Well, for Jacob Eason's case, there's no problem there. He'll top last year's stats. I think what expectations are pretty high for him, completing 55%, 16 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, not great numbers last year. He's got a decent receiving core. The running backs, of course, is going to be the key for every defensive coordinator coming in. They're going to be keying on Chubb and Michelle and company back there. The big question mark to me on the Georgia's offense is that offensive line. They struggled last year. They only have 2 returning starters. They're probably going to end up playing a couple of Frosch, I would think, will emerge in the starting role by the end of the year. And how that offensive line performs is going to be the key to Georgia's success. But if there is team success, Easton will have a good year throwing the football then, and they would have that chance. But I wouldn't put him on my short list of Heisman contenders just yet. Thanks for the call, Phil.
Good stuff. By the way, we will continue for 30 more minutes with Phil Steele. You can give us a ring at 855-242-7285. By the way, we have some breaking news from Ole Miss. Many of you have been following the Houston Nutt lawsuit. Many believe this is the lawsuit that ultimately cost Hugh Freeze his job because of the records that were revealed. Meanwhile, a U.S. District Court judge in Mississippi today dismissed his civil lawsuit against the university and the Board of Trustees, saying the federal court did not have jurisdiction in the matter. Nutt, of course, had filed a lawsuit really asking for nothing more than an apology, something he never gave. He claimed that Hugh Freeze and Ross Bjork and other officials violated his separation agreement by making incorrect statements about him during off-the-record conversations with the media. His attorney, Nutt's attorney, tells ESPN he will refile the case in state court. We will take a break. Back with Phil in just a moment and your phone calls. We welcome you back to the program. Glad you are with us. And let's get back to the calls with Phil Steele. The phone number is 855-242-7285, 855-242-7285. Phil is nice enough to join us for the entire hour, taking your calls. Don't forget, tomorrow night, Ross Bjork will be with us. Again, the news that this lawsuit has been dismissed. We will have an update in a few minutes on what the Houston Nutt side is saying as well. Let's move in and talk to Larry, who is in Florida. Larry, you're on with Phil. Go right ahead.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for taking my call.
Thank you.
A question for Phil. What is it you think of the Florida State offensive line, and do you think Florida State and Alabama will play twice this year?
There's a great chance of it, Larry, and to me that's the key to the game. If you're watching the Florida State-Alabama game, key in on Florida State's offensive line the first 3 series. If they're holding Bama's offensive line at bay, look out, because Florida State's loaded this year. They only lose 3 lettermen on the defensive side of the ball. They get back a guy in Derwin James who was voted the #1 player in the country on an ESPN.com vote, which I participated in. They've got Francois back at quarterback. My main concern, if you're a Florida State fan, is that offensive line. If they hold Alabama at bay the first 3 series, we got ourselves a ball game. If Francois getting hit like he did last year, they're in trouble. But when I talked to Coach Jimbo Fisher last year about this team, it went over them position by position. Every time we got to the end of a position, he'd say, boy, are we going to be good next year? Well, next year's here for Florida State, and that defense is going to be nasty. Appreciate the call, Larry.
Good stuff. Richard is up next. Richard, you are next up and on with Phil Steele. Go ahead.
Hey, Phil, a huge fan for years and years. I'm a big West Coast guy, and of course USC gets all the love out west, but I want to hear your thoughts on the Washington Huskies and what you think their chances are of getting back to the playoff. You know, seems like they got almost their whole team coming back, except for some guys in the secondary, and their quarterback's healthy now and everything. So just your thoughts on the Huskies.
All right, thanks for the call, Richard, and thanks for the kind comments as well. And I agree with you. When you look at Washington, I think if not for that Washington-USC game last year where Washington was at home, everybody watched, and USC pretty much dominated both sides of the line of scrimmage, Washington would be your top 5 team heading into the season. As you touched on, 13 returning starters, Jake Browning, Myles Gaskin, Dante Pettis at receiver, one of the top offensive lines. And defensively, remember, they lost 2 of their top defensive front 7 last year, Azim Victor and Joe Mathis to injury mid-season. Victor's back this year with Vita Vea up front of the defensive tackle. They are loaded. They have to play Stanford on the road during the season, but if they get to the title game, we'll see how they match up this time against USC. But a win there, and they're in the playoffs, so I give them a great shot. And of course, we're very happy with Washington last year. They were my #1 surprise team in the country and went from 7-6 to making the playoffs. Thanks for the call, Richard.
Thank you very, very much. Phil Steele, calls coming in here pretty quickly, and you can get in. Still a little bit of time at 855-242-7285. We got a question tweeted in, unable to call. Any way you can address which teams are hurt most by injuries, transfers this season? That is to, of course, Phil from CFB Forever.
As I touched on at the top, I don't want to overreact to anybody losing a player or two during the season. We haven't seen those cluster ones yet. Now, eventually, by the end of spring or the end of August here, we will see a couple of teams suffer a couple of cluster injuries. And what I mean by that is 2 or 3 injuries at the same position, which could weaken them. But right now, we have not seen that from any team. So I think right now, everybody's still pretty much full go, just the way I thought they would be.
Let's continue with calls. Kevin in Jacksonville, you're up next. Go right ahead, Kevin.
Hey, Paul and Phil, thanks for taking my call. Phil, I had a question about FSU. How do you think they'll do against Alabama? And if they lose that game, how do you think the rest of the season will go for them?
All right, Kevin, thank you much. Just addressed that one a couple minutes ago, but quickly, offensive line for Florida State, if they can hold Alabama at bay those first 2 to 3 series, we got a ball game. I think even if Florida State loses to Alabama, they still have a great shot at making the playoffs this year. The key is going to be 2 of their final 3 games. They have to play at Clemson and at Florida. And Florida is my #1 surprise team in football this year. So you've got a tough November for Florida State, but this is a very talented roster. Appreciate the call, Kevin.
Good stuff. Let's go to Rob in Houston. You're on with Phil Steele. Go right ahead, Rob.
Hey, Phil. I had a quick question on your opinion on the LSU-Auburn game this year. I know it's going to be a little different than 2 years ago when Auburn had a little bit of a weaker defense, but I think that Darius Geis is going to run over them more than Fournette did back 2 years ago, and I want to get your opinion. I don't see them being undefeated for the Iron Bowl in SEC play.
To me, that game's a toss-up heading into the season, and given LSU the home field edge, I do rate LSU an early 3-point favorite in that game, even though they only have 11 returning starters. But I do not think we're going to see Darius Geis run for 200 yards. This Auburn defensive front 7 is much better this year. Number 10 rated defensive line, number 14 set of linebackers. To me, that's going to be one of the better games in college football this year and one of my most anticipated ones to watch on October the 14th. Appreciate the call, Rob.
Dom is next up in Florida for Phil Steele. Go right ahead, Dom.
Hey, how you doing, Phil?
Good.
I've got a quick question about Florida. If things go sideways for Jim McCowan the next couple of years, Can you see them bringing the old ball coach back?
No, I think Coach Spurrier is going to enjoy his retirement. There's a lot of work that goes into being a head coach in college football, and I think Coach Spurrier is enjoying life right now. Plus, after Jim McElwain got his Florida team to the SEC title game with a backup quarterback each of the last 2 years, I think he's got himself a little goodwill built in. Appreciate the call there, Dom.
I'd like to know who Jim McGowan is before we get to that. Anyway, let's go to Tom from Columbus, Ohio. Tom, you are next for Phil Steele. Go right ahead.
Hey, Paul. Pleasure as always. Phil, good talking with you here. Two things here. First thing, Phil, just what your thoughts are on this preseason hype. Everybody knows that it's mainly just to get the fans excited. You know, you got a lot of new players coming into the SEC that are going to take immediate roles. And again, until they get on the football and put some pads on, get hit by other teams, not going to know what they're about. Your thought on that? And then the second question that I have is on University of South Carolina. What do you think about their receiving core as far as coming into the season with Bentley being a great quarterback that he is? I'll sit back and listen.
Well, Tom, you're talking to the wrong guy when it comes to preseason stuff. You know, I do a magazine, so that's my job is to get the teams ready for the season and analyze them. So I'm all for it myself. But as far let's break down that South Carolina receiving core. And how about last year? You got a guy like Deebo Samuel emerged with 783 yards, and then Hayden Hurst, the outstanding tight end. I mean, this guy is 6'5", 253. He can block. He's an outstanding receiver. He looks like an NFL tight end. They've got Deebo Samuel, who very well could be the leading receiver, or Brian Edwards, I should say, comes in. He was a freshman last year at over 500 yards. They've got Casey Crosby. I like the receiving core for South Carolina. And after having zero experience at receiver last year, they come in as my number 15 set of receivers in the country. Got some guy Jake Bentley throwing to them as well. That's going to help out their stats. So I think it'll be a pretty good year for the South Carolina receiving core. Appreciate the call, Tom.
Steve in West Virginia, you're next. Steve, go right ahead. You're on with Phil Steele.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. Hey, Mr. Steele, I want to say, first of all, you're very knowledgeable, and that's very, very good for this show because there's some of the people who call in are just horrible. I have a two-part question. What do you think about West Virginia this year? And in 4 or 5 years when the Big 12 is disbanded, where do you think West Virginia will be?
Yeah, as far as where West Virginia goes, that's interesting, but I think they will be in one. And I'm going to agree with you there, Steve. I think that 4 or 5 years from now, Big 12 gets disbanded. We have 4 16-team super conferences. I guarantee you West Virginia will be one of them. ACC is probably the best fit for them. Right now, traveling over to these the Texas ones was something they had to do just to land that Power 5 conference. But West Virginia has pretty much cemented itself. And as far as this year goes, I think Will Grier at quarterback has got a chance to top Skylar Howard's numbers from last year. It's going to be an explosive offense in that respect. Defensively is where my biggest question mark is with West Virginia. Only 3 returning starters on D. They do get back Drayvon Askew-Henry, who was their top guy heading into last year and missed the season with injury. So how quickly that defense comes around will determine whether or not West Virginia can move into the upper half of the Big 12. Coming off a 10-win season, West Virginia's expectations are super high, but I have them about middle of the pack for the Big 12. Appreciate the call, Steve.
Got another Twitter question here, Phil. This is from Chris asking you, we got a lot of questions on Alabama, but specifically, what about the DBs?
I think it's going to be one of the better set of defensive backs in the country. I rate him number 2 coming in. Remember, they didn't have a huge amount of experience last year, but when you got Minka Fitzpatrick, Ronnie Harrison, Anthony Averett, even a guy stepping in at cornerback, Trayvon Diggs, I think this is one of the best secondaries in the country. And some guy, Nick Saban's got a little something to do with coaching the defensive back unit. So I rate him number 2 in the country coming into the season. Appreciate the tweet there, Chris.
Mike from Austin. Mike, you are next up for Phil Steele. Go right ahead.
Paul, as always, a pleasure. Phil, been getting your magazine for years now. Thanks so much for all the information year in and year out. So my question is, well, you have Miami as the number 4 defensive line unit and the linebacking core as the number 7 unit in the country. With that said, and them being projected as being a better defense than last year, as far as in my opinion, but would it be helpful to play N'Kosi Perry, the freshman quarterback, now, because of the fact that there is a possibility that we will have a top 5 defense this year? Thanks so much, Phil.
All right, thanks for the call, Mike. It's going to be really interesting, the Malik Rozier-N'Kosi Perry battle there. Perry definitely has more athletic talent. Rozier's got the experience, and that's the big question mark. Who do you start? Do you go with the guy with a little more experience? I think that defense is going to win him some ball games. Last year, their defense was banged up during a 4-game stretch. Florida State, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, they lost all 4. But with Chad Thomas, Kendrick Norton, R.J. McIntosh, they're loaded there. They had 3 true freshman linebackers last year, all VHTs, or very highly touted guys. They're all back in Pinckney, Quarterman, and McLeod. That's going to be like a Miami-Florida defense of the past, that defensive front 7. And believe it or not, when they joined the ACC, you would have thought they'd be winning the conference, or at least their division in the conference every year. This will be their first ACC title game that I'm projecting them to get to. 15 returning starters, and I'm very bullish on Miami. I only have an underdog in 1 game this year. At Florida State, I've got them favored in the rest. So if you're a Miami fan, it's going to be that type of season you've been waiting for. Appreciate the call.
Phil, another tweet, this one's from Landon, asking about Mississippi State, especially with Todd Grantham there. How good will that defense, and is it going to be enough?
Well, the big question to me with Mississippi State is the JUCO infusion on the defensive front. And I talk to as many coaches as I can during the course of a year, usually about 80 to 90 of them. Almost every coach is unanimous in the fact that JUCOs hit their stride the second year. Well, Mississippi State needs these JUCOs to hit their stride the first year, especially in that defensive front 7. Now, what I saw to Mississippi State last year, highly unusual. They gave up 4.8 yards per carry, not their normal defense. They need to get that defense back to standards. I don't have too many question marks on offense with Nick Fitzgerald, but that defensive front 7 is my big question mark, and a lot's going to depend how quickly those JUCOs come into play.
Final few minutes, and this has been a very quick hour for Phil Steele. You can call us now or tweet us at Finebaum. At Finebaum, we'll read your tweets. Call us at 855-242-7285. Welcome you back. Final few minutes with Phil Steele of the Phil Steele magazine. It was also announced the other day, Phil, that you will be you've been part of ESPN, but you're joining ESPN full-time. What exactly does that mean?
Full-time on the staff, Paul, doing a lot more writing and doing a bunch of TV this year, so looking forward to it.
Well, good to hear. Well, let's get back to the calls at 855-242-7285 for Phil Steele. Kevin, you are next up. Go right ahead.
Hey, guys. I want to talk about LSU, Auburn, Alabama. What happens if they're all a one-loss team? LSU beats Auburn.
Well, let me jump in and make it quick. Kevin,
LSU.
It really depends on a tiebreaker, so it's a little bit complicated to figure out before game 1. But there is a system in place by the SEC. It's head-to-head, and after that, I'm not sure the next avenue, maybe rankings, maybe the other side of again, it's August 9th. I think we can figure that out by the time we have to deal with it. Let's go to Jay up next. Jay, you're on with Phil Steele. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I'm an Arkansas transplant down here in St. Pete, and I was wondering about your take on the Razorbacks. And thank you. And as Coach always says, woo pig.
Thank you very much.
Going over the team with Coach Bielema a couple weeks ago, I like the size on the defensive line. If there was a problem last year, it was that they gave up 5.9 yards per carry. They've switched to the 3-4 defense. They've got a bunch of 300-pounders in there. I think they're going to be a lot tougher against the run. One of the major reasons Arkansas's defense didn't live up to my expectations last year, they lost 3 key players to injuries, like Kevin Richardson and Dre Greenlaw. Those guys are both back, so I think they're going to have a better defense. Austin Allen is one of the more exciting quarterbacks in the country. I think he's going to have a much-improved year, tallied off the end of last year. And don't be concerned about Raleigh Williams being gone. I look for a big year out of Whaley at running back. Will Arkansas contend in the West? I don't think so this year. They only have 3 true SEC home games. They've got basically 5 away from home. But I do think that they're a team that's going to get back to a bowl, middle-of-the-pack SEC West, and perhaps even contend next year. I like what Bielema is doing with Arkansas. Thanks for the call, Jay.
Phil, we've had calls from all over the country. We've had tweets. Now we actually have a question from our control booth. Randy Heritage wants to fire away. Randy, you're on with Phil Steele.
How's it going, Phil? Oklahoma grad here. How much drop-off do you see in Oklahoma's offense this year with them losing both running backs, having to replace Westbrook as well, but they've got Baker Mayfield and Mark Andrews back?
I think there will be a little drop-off, but it won't be huge. Having Mayfield back, my number one rated offensive line, is huge. They need Rodney Anderson to really step up and emerge. Anderson's 220 pounds, but going over the team with Coach Lincoln Riley a couple weeks ago, he loves the depth. He says they go 5 deep at running back, and I like the talent as well. They've got big guys with speed. They're not quite what Mixon and Pirine were, but I think they'll be okay there. In the receiving core, watch Marquise Brown, Jeffrey Meade. They're not going to have one guy like Dede Westbrook, but it's going to be more of a receiving core by committee, and I like Mark Andrews. So overall for Oklahoma, I've got them going from 43.9 points per game down to 41.9 points per game. Still pretty potent. Appreciate it, Randy.
Not much time. Randy, good question. You need to stay in the business. Let's check in with Chris, who is in Alabama, asking, I'm sure, about the Crimson Tide. Go right ahead, Chris.
Hey, I appreciate it. I'm impressed with your knowledge, Phil, about not only the local teams, but all the way to the West Coast and back, and I appreciate your knowledge. I wanted to ask you, I'm excited about the offensive coordinator hire at Alabama, installing that pro-style pre-snap read, and I do believe we've always had the talent, not necessarily the best system on both sides of the ball. We've relied mainly on defense. I think this year is going to be more offense carrying the defense and resting them, and I kind of wondered what's your take on that.
I still think Alabama's defense is going to be pretty doggone good. Maybe they're not going to get the 53 and 54 sacks they've had the last 2 years, but they're still going to be one of the nation's best. Offensively, though, Brian Daboll steps into a great situation. You're talking about an offensive line that's rated number 2 in the country, dangerous receivers, Ridley, Foster, Judy, the best set of running backs in the country, and now a quarterback with experience in Jalen Hurts. I think they're more explosive. I've got them averaging 41 points per game this year on offense. Should be a pretty exciting year there. Appreciate the call, Chris.
Phil, we don't have time for another call. I do want to go back just a couple of seconds left. Your picks to win it all.
I've got the Final Four, Alabama out of the SEC, Ohio State, a much more experienced team this year. Out of the Big Ten, they go from 6 returning starters to 15. Get Kevin Wilson as the offensive coordinator. Florida State, touched on them earlier. Coach Fisher was building towards this year, and they are loaded on defense and have an experienced quarterback. And then USC out of the Pac-12. I've got the Trojans running the table this year in the regular season.
Phil, many thanks. Always a pleasure to visit with you. We are out of time. One more hour to go.
A lot of fun, Paul.
Okay, Kevin, for the grand prize of $1 million, what color is the White House?
I know this.
5 seconds.
Oh, switching to Geico could save you a bunch of money on car insurance?
Okay. Judges? That's true, Kevin. They'll allow it. Congratulations. You're a winner.
Woo!
Geico, because saving 15% or more on car insurance is always a great answer.